Good evening everyone and welcome to an Oz Cyclone Chasers Cyclone video update tonight, the 6th of March 2014. There is a massive jumbling mess happening out there in the Coral Sea and eventually the Gulf of Carpentaria, and we need to get through it. And I'm sorry, but it's going to take a while. There's a lot of complex things happening there. I'll try an overview for the first few minutes, so if you only have a couple of minutes, watch the first few minutes and we'll go through the overview. But then if you want to know the nitty-gritty and all the possibilities and all the probabilities, then you need to sit through the next 20-25 minutes after that. Alright folks, a big welcome also to a number of new Year 12 students from Ignatius Park College who have just recently begun following Oz Cyclone Chasers, so a big shout out to them. Welcome guys, and a number of our followers who follow Higgins Storm Chasing who have come over thanks to his recommendation. Welcome to all you guys as well on our social media. Alright, let's get into it. If you head over to the Bureau of Meteorology Cyclone page, you would be mistaken for thinking that we're beating up things for no reason because there are no current cyclones. Well, that is definitely true. There are no current cyclones, but let's have a look what there is. Woo! Look at this. Look at this thunderstorm activity developing out here. Very widespread all over the Coral Sea, all along the monsoonal trough. We can see some very heavy activity there, particularly in the area where this low lies right now. So this low is lying right now at around about 12 or 13 south, 152 or 153 east, right in here underneath that convection. So for those that don't have time to sit through the entire broadcast, let me give you the quick overview. And what we're expecting is that the system will track in a southwest and then eventually stall off the coast here of Cairns, track in a south, and then very, very slowly possibly in a southeast and then east direction away from the coast. So pretty well that sort of motion is the most favoured motion of this system. We're expecting it to become a Category 1 cyclone as it adopts its southward track off the North Queensland coast, and we could see it further develop into a Category 2. Maybe even there are whispers behind the scenes from people in the know that it may develop even slightly higher than that. Although I would be very skeptical about that at this point in time, because it really will need to tighten up quickly if it does so. Now look folks, that is the expected scenario, but let me go through and highlight here the type of error margin we're looking at for this particular system. Error margins, we have or an error margin that the system could actually cross the coast all in this area all the way south to just south of Mackay and could be lying in that region there. So that is our entire error margin. So we see a error margin further to the east, we see an error margin way further to the west along the coastline. Now earlier today there was some model guidance suggesting a north of Cairns crossing again, and that was throwing further spanners into the works, but thankfully that has now come back to the pack and it's suggesting a more southerly landfall. So really we have outlying models suggesting a landfall just south of Cairns around Innisfail and as far south as Serena, but we also have outlying models that keep the system well east of about 150 degrees east, and so therefore the impacts on the coastline remain quite small. So all of this is expected to happen, expected to become a cyclone sometime on Saturday, probably more so later on Saturday, and then Sunday it stalls near the coast. Now whether it's on the coast, whether it's just inland of the coast, whether it's just off the coast, who knows? And we can't tell you, the bomb can't tell you, no one can tell you, because anyone that tries to tell you is lying. We just don't know what the impacts on the coast are going to be. We can tell you what the impacts are most likely to be, and most likely we're going to see gale force winds, particularly on the southwest, south and southeastern quadrants of the system. So if you look at this track, if you're south of this track, southwest of this track or southeast of this track, you are likely to experience gale force winds, possibly damaging and destructive winds depending on how close the system gets. So that is what we're at the moment in a nutshell. Now look, the other issue we have is that we now have a Gulf of Carpentaria tropical low developing over the next 24 to 48 hours. So now we need to zoom out, because if we zoom out and actually have a look at there could be an interaction here, what we call a Fujiwara interaction, and what might happen here is we might have this low developing here pushing southeast Now there's two schools of thought here. One is that it crosses the Cape and interacts with, remembering our other low, which comes in this track here. It interacts with that low and possibly limits this low from developing or deepening quickly, and that might limit its intensity. So that's one school of thought. The other school of thought is that this tropical low or cyclone in the Gulf will decide to track back towards the west and into the Northern Territory. So there's two schools of thought there, two vastly different options taken by different model guidances, and will possibly have quite an effect on this system, particularly if it adopts this particular track here, where it's going to have a big effect on the Coral Sea tropical low or tropical cyclone. Now look, these are abbreviated track forecasts. Obviously they're not going to follow that exact path, no doubt. I don't have to explain that to our regular followers, but maybe our new followers might think, oh Nitso, you're wrong. No, look, they're not going to adopt that exact path, but that's a simplified track forecast. Alright, so there we go, folks. That is it in a nutshell. I've narrowed it down to 6 minutes for you. If you happen to be south, southwest, southeast of this tropical low, you're going to see huge amounts of rainfall. You're going to see very, very strong winds, but it's all dependent on how close the system gets to the coast. With regards to the Gulf of Carpentaria low, if it pushes across the Cape, normally we would experience huge amounts of rainfall to the south of that. Unfortunately, with this tropical low here, it's actually going to stop a lot of the rain that this Gulf low would produce to its south, because there's no real southerly feed into the system, because that's been hogged by the tropical low over here in Queensland. So basically we've got a situation where this low here is going to hog all the northwesterly flow, so there's not going to be much in terms of northwesterly flow into this system, and this one is going to hog southeasterly flow that would be going into that Gulf system. So really, folks, they're going to work against each other if this particular scenario develops, and we have the Gulf low that pushes east-southeast or southeast and crosses the Cape. If that happens, we're going to limit the potential for this system to intensify. It's going to become a bit more of a trophy type system, and until it reestablishes its supremacy, I guess, if you like, and pushes out to the east and reforms or forms into something a little bit more significant. But look, that's only one possible scenario, one possible issue that could happen. It is that complex. I could really talk about this for hours with you, but I do have to abbreviate this to get it done. So there you go, folks. That is it in a nutshell. Now let's go through some nitty-gritty stuff. So if you're not interested in a little bit more about the science, the probabilities, and a bit more about the exact rainfall figures, look away now. Thanks for watching it. For those that are, stick with us now. So once again, folks, this is our tropical low. We've got some really nice convective blooms or convective clusters in and around the center of the system there. And if we have a look at the satellite derived at 4 p.m. Queensland time, we actually see quite a marked area of increase in easterly flow, particularly to the southeastern quadrant of the system. So we actually have 20 to 25 knot winds based on satellite imagery. And we can see that the system has in fact tightened up a little bit compared to what it was like earlier today. This is from 4 p.m. today, so we can see that it does have, even at its weakest, it's got 10 knots wrapping around to its northern quadrants, but really its southern quadrants are the ones that are going to pack the punch, and once again they're likely to pack the punch throughout its entire life cycle. But we're looking here 20 to 25 knots. That's a significant deepening compared to what it was this time last night when I was talking to you, where we had 5 knots on the north and about 10 knots to the south. So that's a significant increase in the winds around the center of the system. So this is the wind shear values today. Now we saw overnight last night the wind shear decreased from about 20 to 25 knots down to about 10 knots, and so we saw that continuing today through to about lunchtime, and then we haven't got any more recent data from that. So let's have a look at the SIMS wind shear analysis for the 4 p.m. Remembering that wind shear is the change of direction or speed of the winds with height, and what we need for a cyclone is we need less than 20 knots of that. So obviously yesterday, not a very good day. Today, much better day. So here is the 4 p.m. wind shear analysis, and what we see right here is that the low located just in there, just to the north actually of that convective cluster. I showed you the convective cluster earlier. The actual low circulation center probably just to the north, but don't be surprised if they reposition it straight under the convective bloom. Now underneath that, so that lies in 20 knots of wind shear. As it tracks to the south, now remember that the system will track in a southerly direction from there. So it's going to track into here. Or possibly even in a southwesterly direction. So either or, and regardless, it's going to track into a region of much lower wind shear. So you can see here a value of 5, a value of 10. So it's going to track into 5 to 15 knots of wind shear over the next 24 to 36 hours, and that's why model guidance, once it tightens up at the surface, and it looks like it's starting to do that, once it does that, model guidance has to overall develops it pretty rapidly, except for possibly the Euro, which has that interaction with the other low. Now if we look also at the Gulf of Carpentaria, where this other low is likely to be, we're going to see really ideal shear conditions out here too. So this system, don't be surprised if this system in the northern Gulf deepens quite rapidly over the next couple of days under very, very low vertical wind shear value. One of the things that I'm often guilty at overlooking are the values of upper level divergence. So what happens is when a thunderstorm grows, the tops of the storms need to go somewhere, and if they can't escape, what happens is the storm basically chokes itself, and so therefore we can't see ongoing thunderstorm structure in the middle of a cyclone or in the middle of a developing low, so it tends to kill it off. Now what these values show us, the higher the value in this one, the better. It shows us a greater amount of upper level divergence, and so if we get these negative values, they're very bad. That shows upper level convergence, and that's what we don't want in a tropical cyclone or a developing tropical low. So we can see the system isn't lying in an ideal upper level divergent environment, but it is tracking into a much better environment in this direction. So as it heads into the central Coral Sea and even west of 150 degrees, we're going to see conditions become much more ideal for it. The other thing we can see up here in the northern Gulf, once again, it's also in a fairly favourable upper level divergent airflow or wind flow. So we could see, as I said again, some possibly rapid intensification of this system on days 2 and 3. So I've shown you the good bits. Let me show you the bad bits here. The problem with this system in terms of its possible development is the fact that there's no clear low-level vorticity maximum. So vorticity is spin. A spin creates low pressure, and at the moment what we have is a very active monsoon trough, and I showed you that on the satellite image. And so what we have along that monsoon trough is just a whole big area of vorticity, or just a big line of vorticity, but inside that we don't have anything that strikes out at us and goes bang, this is the potential low, this is it, this is where it's going to happen. So that's why the system at this point in time is not expected to develop rapidly, even though it's heading into a very good area for, in terms of atmospheric features, for it to form quickly. But the issue is it needs to tighten up at the surface first, and at the moment we haven't got a very tight circulation overall. It's just part of a fairly strong trough system. So what we want to see over the next 12 to 18 hours, possibly 24 hours, is we want to see this red area tighten up, possibly become white. We want to see it really tighten up. We don't want to see this big elongated feature of vorticity. So if we can see that, and that happens in the next 24 hours, as it tracks into perfect conditions, this system could bomb out. So that is a distinct possibility. But at for the next 12 to 24 hours, we just can't see it happening because it just does not have that centralized area of vorticity. Now this can change quickly, so that's possibly going a positive for it. So why the hell is it not moving towards the coast? We have a big high pressure system, big high pressure ridge all along here, the southern parts of Australia. So why does it not move directly towards the coast and smack into Cooktown? Well, here's the reason, and to find the reason we need to look further to the east. This is the upper level high I've been talking about now for over a week. It's just been sitting there near Fiji, and along that upper level high, we have winds that are pushing the system in that direction. Now, yes, we have ridging winds, so we have winds that are trying to push it in this direction, but they are nowhere near as strong as the winds coming from the north. And so you can see that by the colouring. So you can see here we've got a bit of green, a little bit of green, a tiny bit of yellow, but here these winds coming from the north, you can see have a lot more strength to them. Now, that doesn't mean that the system will just track south-southeast. What it means is that using vector diagrams, we can find that the resultant movement of that system will be more in a south-southwest direction rather than a west-northwest direction. So if we didn't have this wind up here and all we had to rely on was the winds coming in from the south, from the ridge, the system would move basically due west because it moves slightly southwards of where the arrow's pointing. So we would see the system move directly in that way or that way. So because we have that extra flow or that different flow, we see that actual vector direction change and become a lot more southerly. So that motion should be anywhere from south-southwest to south over the next 24 hours in response to this ridge over Fiji, and also in response to this lesser strength ridge over the southern parts of Australia. Now eventually what happens is that this ridge will weaken its hold on the system, and this ridge should strengthen its hold on the system, and the system should eventually start tracking closer to the coast in a much more southwest to even west-southwest direction. Now how long it can do that before a new steering mechanism hits it and starts to push it more in a easterly direction is the key here as to whether the system can make landfall. So let's have a look at what some of the model guidance is suggesting. Oh, and don't let me forget the fact that we've got a fairly raging monsoon out here. So that is adding to the easterly component of the movement. So we're seeing, you can see up here some very strong winds coming from west to east, and that is as a result of the monsoonal flow. So we have a few different factors acting on them that wouldn't normally be acting. Normally we wouldn't have this big ridge here over Fiji. It wouldn't be there. So it wouldn't be the driving mechanism or the driving force for the system pushing in a southerly direction. Normally in this situation, as we would normally expect climatologically, the system would track almost directly towards the coast. But this is not a typical scenario. Alright, so the first of the models that we're going to look at is the GFS model, and we see the system here right now, and it's going to track in a southerly direction, and then as I said, it's going to track in a little bit more of a southwesterly direction. Now, once again, that's because the Fijian high starts to lessen its grip, the ridge builds underneath it, and we see a little bit more of a track to the southwest as opposed to a south-southwest direction. So because of that, the system gets very close to the coast, and when the upper trough comes through or starts to come through, starts to impact the system is already basically on land, and so we see the system making landfall between Townsville and Mackay. Now the model here has been very, very consistent over the past 2 days or so, while every other model has been chopping and changing like crazy. This model has been extremely consistent, I have to say. As much as I don't like to use it, it has been extremely consistent, so we do pay attention to it. At this stage, expecting it to become Category 1 or very weak Category 2. The Bureau of Meteorology model, the short-term access regional model, has also been chopping and changing. Not also, but is one of the ones that has been chopping and changing like there's no tomorrow. And here it is, 5 AM Friday on your screen there. There's the low. It's around about 14 south. So it sort of positions that low, or repositions that low, right underneath that convective bloom that I mentioned to you. So as we head to 5 PM Friday, we see the low continuing to track southwestwards. As we head to 5 AM Saturday, it pushes more to the west. Now remember why it's pushing to the west here. The model is suggesting that the ridging will take hold of the system. The upper ridging or mid-level ridging from Fiji starts to give way. The westerlies from the monsoon start to give way, and the ridging becomes the major steering influence for a short period. Now, as we head to Saturday night, it pushes southwest, gets very close to the coast. As we head to Sunday morning, you can see here, just lying off the coast of Queensland, and we'll go in 3-hour timestamps here, right off the coast of Cairns, and the system basically then does its stall. And really that is a worst case scenario for massive rainfall in the far north or North Queensland coastline, the Herbert and Lower Burdekin especially. That sort of rainfall will, or that sort of stall right there, will cause 50 to 100 mils over 3 hours for continuous periods. So you're looking at torrential rainfall over a possibly 24 to 48 hour period, which could signal rainfalls of 300 or more millimeters over the course of one day. And that could be for up to 2 days. So really, folks, that's not a scenario we really want anywhere on the coastline, because that's just going to cause damage and destruction. That's really not ideal, but it is certainly on the cards. The key difference in this model guidance compared to the GFS is, as you saw in this one, you saw this period on Saturday where the system pushes almost directly west under the influence of the ridge. If it doesn't do that direct west push, the stall happens further off the coast, the heavy rain happens further southwards. So this is Saturday morning according to the UK Met model, and the UK Met model has the system located well offshore, basically to the east, or just to the east-northeast of Cairns, probably about 300 or so kilometres offshore. You can see here a lot of the rainfall is still falling offshore, not much is getting onto the coast. On day 3, the UK Met once again pushes the system just southwards of where it was. It doesn't really push it much closer to the coast, just to the south, and we see some very heavy rain, particularly on the southeastern quadrant here on the UK Met. Some really heavy, this white stuff suggesting 150 plus millimetres, but we're still seeing some moderate falls developing on the coastline, even with the system located there, anywhere south of about Townsville, all the way south to about Rocky. We're seeing some moderate falls hitting the coast, possibly some heavy falls around Mackay. Now also we're looking at the low in the Gulf of Carpentaria making landfall on the Sunday sometime on the West Peninsula coastline. Now that varies between Sunday and Monday. Now remember, it could be an interaction here between these systems, but it's all time dependent as to when and where these systems lie, as to whether they're going to interact with each other. On Monday, we see that Gulf low is now pushing towards the eastern Cape York Peninsula. Now remember, there's two scenarios here. As I said to you at the start, there's the scenario where it does do this, and there's the other scenario where it hits the West Peninsula, or gets close to the West Peninsula, pushes back to the west. Now this system here remains in the central Coral Sea, but pushing slightly further offshore now, and so what we're seeing is certainly no rain anywhere north of about Bowen, and only light to moderate falls on the coastline, but possibly extending all the way down the coast, all the way to southeast Queensland. Could be seeing some showers from this as well. So that's the UK Met on day 4, so that's the Monday. And then on the Tuesday, the system's out to the east-northeast and starting to get sheared off. Not too much rain now falling on the coastline. The system in the peninsula tried to get to the East Peninsula and then boom, stopped. There was a fairly strong ridge there that pushed it back to the west, and some of the guidance is doing that too. Gets the system out here and then pushes it back to the west. No real interaction between the two here on the UK Met. So that's out to Tuesday. So by Tuesday, the whole situation's over. The system starts to push further to the east. And we start to see, because the system pushes further to the east, we actually start to see some moderate falls of rain anywhere north of Cairns from the Gulf of Carpentaria low. Alright, this is a very high resolution model, but it is an experimental model. This is the FIM9 model, and it has the system doing exactly what I've mentioned, pushing southwards in response to that ridge over Fiji, then starts to push a little bit more southwest, but unlike the Bureau of Meteorology's model, it doesn't push directly west, and only pushes southwest for a short period, and then continues pushing south while intensifying into a Category 1 or 2 tropical cyclone as it does so. Now, it lies very close to the coast, but just off about Cardwell. We see this very, very heavy 150mm plus rainfall getting very close to the coastline, possibly nudging the coast between Townsville and Bowen, and some moderate to heavy falls further to the south there on the Saturday. We also see the Gulf of Carpentaria low developing into a tropical cyclone as well. Possibly a little bit too aggressive on both of these counts, but certainly a model, because of its high resolution, that we should pay some attention to. As we head to day 3, we see the Gulf of Carpentaria lower cyclone making possibly an approach onto the Coral Sea around Princess Charlotte Bay, and we finally see the Coral Sea system actually make landfall. Now, this is one of the few models that is showing a landfall, and the landfall is just between Bowen and Proserpine as a Category 1 or 2 tropical cyclone with some extreme rainfall to its south, particularly in the Mackay area here, you can see with the white shading, but some moderate to heavy falls going all the way down the coast, even as far as southeast Queensland, just like the UK Met was showing on the Sunday. Now, once again, this is an aggressive solution, but it could be a verifiable one. There's nothing to suggest that it's off its tree when it's suggesting this sort of aggressiveness. By day 4, the modelling goes pear-shaped because we have an interaction between this tropical low pushing southeast and this tropical low stalling, making landfall, but stalling just around the coastal region and starts to push eastwards as well. So what we might see is a merging of the two lows and a Fujiwara interaction where they merge into a central point back here off the coast, and eventually it shifts it off to the east. So out to day 4, we're starting to clutch at straws and we're starting to see some pretty interesting scenarios and situations happening. So let's just stick with the first 3 days. Some of the lesser reliable modelling, the NOGAPS or NavGem model, keeps the system well and truly off the coast, but even with that, does push a little bit of rain anywhere south of Townsville, pushes some light to moderate rainfall. And the CMC model doesn't love Queensland at all. It sort of puts a little bit of a repellent, a cyclone repellent on Queensland, and we see the system pushing southwest well and truly off the coast, and no chance of delivering any sort of shower or rain activity anywhere on the coast, but it is a very, very far eastern outlier. And the Gulf of Carpentaria system pushes in, possibly becomes a cyclone, or a very weak one at that, possibly becomes one, and pushes then south on the Western Cape. Always love to give you the latest current guidance, and so this is the latest GFS. Now, the one I showed you just earlier was the 10 AM GFS, and we see the system here developing on the Friday, Saturday morning. So by Saturday it becomes a tropical cyclone. This is Saturday 10 AM. We can also see the system out here in the northern Gulf of Carpentaria too. So this is now Saturday night, 10 PM, and we see that the system here in the northern Gulf could be a tropical cyclone. It's very tough to say, but overall looks like just gales to its north. And we see the system here lying directly east of about Cairns on the 10 PM guidance. And as we head and track the system by 72 hours, so by Sunday 4 PM, I'm sorry, this is only a partial run because it's only just coming out, we see landfall somewhere between Townsville and Bowen on that system, on this latest model. But we also see the interaction possibly beginning between these two systems once this one makes landfall and this one starts to exit the east coast of the Cape. And eventually what we'll see is a merging of the two systems around a central point, and that central point will become right around Townsville or just to the north of Townsville, and those systems will then push off to the east on Monday night into Tuesday, or expected to do so into Tuesday. So look, that's going to be very complex, and it's going to be very interesting if it comes out that way. And that's not the only model showing something similar. Let's have a look at the European. So here's the Euro at 10 AM tomorrow. We can see our low here, very, very elongated looking ugly thing, and we've got the actual Gulf of Carpentaria low, looks better than this one. So if we head towards Friday night and we see how those systems progress, we see the Gulf of Carpentaria one remains fairly stationary. We still see the Queensland one, just a big ugly low pressure vorticity elongated mess, and as we head towards Saturday morning, we continue to see this Gulf low looking very good. Look, it's starting to produce gales to its north. It actually looks like a cyclone. This one still looks like an elongated mess even as we head to Saturday morning. As we head to Saturday night, we're going to see this one tighten up, but still not producing gales around its centre, more than halfway around its centre. This one starts to produce gales, but look, it's not a typical classical tropical cyclone. It really doesn't look it. You can tell it looks very ugly, and it looks very ugly all the way through till Sunday morning. It still hasn't tightened up. Look at how far away. That's the centre. That's about 100 k's away, that maximum wind. So this one here, you can see, looks a lot tighter up here to the north. As we head to Sunday night, the European gets it very close to the coastline, basically directly east of about Cardwell. So we're seeing bulk rainfall and gale force winds from Bowen down to Mackay, possibly down further to St. Lawrence. We're still seeing gales around the north, the northern quadrants of the Cape York Peninsula, Gulf of Carpentaria low, And on Monday morning, we see the Gulf low is now starting to exit around Princess Charlotte Bay. We see the Coral Sea system remaining stationary in and around the western Coral Sea near the Whitsundays coastline, between basically directly east of Townsville, dumping heaps of rain, dumping heaps of wind onto this area. Now they're starting to interact on the Monday afternoon, where they're starting to show signs of an interaction. Then on Monday night, they certainly do interact and they form one big trough line. And in that trough line, we've got some very, very strong gale force winds, possibly the strongest winds of the system. And then as we head to Tuesday morning, we see the system just remaining stationary for a few more hours before it starts to trek off to the east or east-northeast on the Tuesday and then Wednesday. But folks, look, that's a very problematic scenario. Once we have interactions between multiple low pressure systems, they're not very well modelled. So looking at the Euro ensemble, we see the low most likely to be located there. We see the other low most likely to be located there. That's on Saturday morning. As we head to Sunday morning, we see that the low possibly could be deepening in the Gulf, and we also see the Coral Sea low possibly deeper in the Coral Sea. And we see it nudging, possibly nudging the coastline in the between the Townsville and Cairns region, and also, but most likely, we see the system remaining well offshore on the Euro. Now, as we head towards Monday, we see once again the most likely scenario is that the system remains offshore, and once again the deeper system should be well offshore. But there is still the possibility of the system actually on the coast between about Townsville and Mackay, and also we're looking at the Gulf of Carpentaria system possibly being deeper as well, but overall lying very close to the Western Cape. That's as far as we're going is Monday. The GFS model overall is suggesting that the low is going to be located, or cyclone will be located there Saturday morning directly east of Cairns. I've already shown you that, but there is a fairly high error margin here of it being a lot further to the southeast, and there's also a high error margin of it being a lot further to the west. So there's already a limited confidence even today, day 2. So forget about day 3, but let's just have a look at it just for fun. Day 3, the system is most likely to have made landfall on most of the GFS model members around the Townsville region or further south towards the Bowen region, and the other low in the Gulf is expected to remain offshore of near the West Peninsula on the Sunday morning. But look, there's still an error margin keeping the system a lot further to the south around Mackay, and possibly a little bit further offshore as well. So that's the error that we're looking for in the GFS ensemble. Folks, that's as much as we've got time for tonight. It keeps dragging on because it just keeps getting more complex. So the more complex it gets, the more I got to talk. Alright, thanks very much for watching. Thanks for sticking with me tonight for half an hour. It's been a long half an hour, but there's so much to get through. We'll talk again tomorrow night. Good night.